The heavy silence of the grand family study was broken only by the scratching of the lawyer's fountain pen. Arthur sat quietly, ready to sign the final documents that would legally transfer 50% of the family empire's controlling shares into his name. But just as his fingers brushed the heavy leather folder, the mahogany doors were violently kicked open. His older brother, Edward, strutted into the room with an arrogant, triumphant sneer. Behind him trailed Oliver, a strange young man wearing a flashy suit that didn't quite fit his sleazy demeanor. Before anyone could speak, Edward slammed a sealed medical document directly onto the polished desk. "Stop the transfer," Edward sneered, tapping the paper. "Certified DNA results. Meet Oliver, our late father's illegitimate eldest son." Arthur stared at the DNA test in absolute shock. He turned to his mother, Eleanor, expecting to see her completely shattered by the sudden revelation of her late husband's infidelity. Instead, Eleanor's cold, regal face broke into a sickeningly proud, calculating smile. She didn't even look at Arthur. Walking straight past him, she warmly embraced the stranger. "The true, rightful eldest bloodline has finally returned to us," she announced, her voice echoing with cruel authority. Without a single moment of hesitation, Eleanor reached across the desk, snatched Arthur's inheritance contract, and viciously tore it in half, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. Arthur's chest tightened with burning indignation. "You're giving him everything," he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of pure anger and betrayal. "I have carried this family's empire on my back for 5 agonizing years while he didn't even exist to us." Eleanor's proud smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer aristocratic disdain. She calmly picked up her crystal glass of vintage red wine and, with a swift, merciless flick of her wrist, splashed the dark crimson liquid directly into Arthur's face. "You were merely a temporary placeholder, Arthur," she spat out, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "Do not dare to compare yourself to the true, rightful heir of this estate. You are nothing but an entitled seat warmer." Edward let out a loud, mocking laugh, clapping the sleazy Oliver on the shoulder. "Guards!" Edward barked, pointing a vicious finger toward the door. "Throw this ungrateful brat and his trash out of my house." Minutes later, Arthur was violently shoved through the towering, heavy wrought iron gates of the estate, his leather suitcase crashing onto the cold, wet pavement beside him. The freezing night air bit at his skin as he slowly wiped the blood-red wine from his eyes. He looked up at the grand, glowing balcony of the mansion. There, bathed in warm, luxurious light, Edward and Oliver were arrogantly clinking their glasses together in a triumphant toast. The deep heartbreak in Arthur's eyes instantly crystallized into an icy, terrifying vow. He was going to expose their pathetic, fabricated lie and tear their stolen world apart. 3 short weeks later, the prestigious family estate had been turned into a playground for thieves. Oliver, the so-called lost son, was paraded around in custom Italian suits that still somehow looked incredibly cheap on his sleazy frame. He spent his days recklessly drinking and eagerly signing every single opaque financial document Edward slid across his desk. It was a flawless, sickening scam. Oliver was nothing more than a pathetic, greedy puppet, allowing Edward to quietly siphon tens of millions of dollars out of the family's private trust funds. Eleanor, completely blinded by her obsessive devotion to the rightful bloodline, proudly enabled their every move, entirely oblivious to the fact that her beloved legacy was being aggressively bled dry. The charade reached its absolute peak at the family's glittering annual gala. The grand ballroom was dripping with fake, sickening opulence, packed tightly with the city's most elite billionaires, politicians, and breathless journalists. Eleanor, draped in heavy, priceless diamonds and wearing a triumphant, arrogant smile, descended the sweeping marble staircase with her arm proudly linked through Oliver's. The crowd erupted into polite, manufactured applause, bright camera flashes illuminating the massive golden stage where the final, irrevocable transfer of the entire family estate was waiting to be signed. They thought they had officially won. Just as Oliver picked up the heavy gold pen to officially sign away the estate, the glittering crystal chandeliers above violently snapped off, plunging the grand ballroom into sudden, pitch-black darkness. A second later, the massive LED screens behind the stage roared to life, blasting a crisp, undeniable audio recording of Edward and Oliver explicitly negotiating their multi-million-dollar scam. Before the shocked crowd could even gasp, the heavy oak doors were brutally kicked open. Arthur strode into the room, draped in a flawless, custom black suit, radiating a terrifying, untouchable aura of absolute authority. Flanking him was a heavily armed, elite squad of federal financial investigators. The ballroom instantly erupted into absolute, panicked chaos. Arthur calmly walked up the marble steps of the stage, his icy, predatory gaze locking onto the terrified imposters. He slammed a thick, red-stamped criminal dossier onto the podium right in front of them. "Meet the real Oliver," Arthur's voice boomed over the speakers, slicing through the panic like a cold blade. "A bankrupt, desperate, D-list actor hired by my own brother for $1 million to play the role of a lifetime." Oliver's fake, arrogant confidence completely vaporized in a single second. His knees violently gave out, and he crashed to the floor, hyperventilating and hysterically begging for mercy, loudly confessing to the entire fabricated plot right in front of the flashing cameras. Edward's face violently drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. Blind panic hijacked his mind, and he scrambled backward, desperately trying to bolt toward the side emergency exit. But he didn't even make it 3 steps. The federal agents lunged forward, brutally tackling him to the cold marble floor. The sharp, unmistakable click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed through the massive ballroom as they arrested him on the spot for massive corporate fraud and forgery. Edward's smug, aristocratic sneer was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic, hysterical sobbing of a broken man realizing his privileged life was completely over. Eleanor watched the horrific scene unfold, her eyes wide with pure, soul-crushing terror. The devastating reality violently crashed down on her. She had eagerly handed over her entire legacy to a cheap con artist and violently thrown her only loyal, capable son out into the street. Her regal, untouchable facade completely shattered. Stripped of all her arrogant pride, Eleanor collapsed to the floor. Her priceless diamond necklaces clattered loudly against the marble as she shamelessly crawled toward Arthur, desperately grabbing at his polished shoes. "Arthur, please," she wailed, thick mascara running down her face in ugly streaks. "You have to stop this. You must save your brother. Please save our family." Arthur looked down at her clinging, trembling hands with absolute, freezing disgust. Slowly and deliberately, he coldly pulled his leg out of her pathetic grasp. "There is no family left to save, Mother," he whispered, his voice dangerously low, sending a horrific chill through the entire ballroom. He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a heavy, notarized financial document, dropping it onto the marble floor right in front of her tear-stained face. Edward and his fake brother secretly accumulated $50 million in illegal corporate debt. I didn't just expose them, I quietly bought every single one of their toxic loans. I am now the sole creditor of this entire estate. I am foreclosing on everything, starting with this very mansion. The grand, opulent ballroom was finally swept completely clean of the traitors. Arthur sat alone, exuding absolute, unquestionable dominance in the high-backed mahogany chair at the head of the family's ancient boardroom. Through the towering, floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers hauling his screaming, ruined brother away into the cold, unforgiving night. Down below, on the freezing wet pavement, bank officials forcefully dragged Eleanor out of the heavy wrought iron gates, violently tossing her meager belongings into the mud. Stripped of her stolen wealth, her arrogant pride, and her beloved fake heir, she was left sobbing hysterically in the gutter. Arthur took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of his vintage red wine. The corrupted bloodline was finally purged, and the empire was truly his.